A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Akaite Afia in Lagos. More protests are taking place in Myanmar, this time in the country's capital, Naypyidaw, where the police have used water cannons on workers conducting a nationwide strike against the military coup. Thousands are taking part in a third day of street protests, calling for the release of civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi and for democracy to be restored.
It's a third day of mass protests across the country of Myanmar. And this time, the police are not allowing the tens of thousands across the country to protest in peace. Earlier, they fired water cannon at protesters in the capital, Naypyidaw. According to eyewitnesses, some protesters were injured by the water cannon, which was used only in brief bursts. Demonstrations continued even after the water cannon was deployed. The protests are also taking place in other cities. In Yangon, for instance, Myanmar's largest city, there have been calls to join the protests and to back a campaign of civil disobedience, which have grown louder and more organized since last Monday's coup. So far, the gatherings have been peaceful, unlike bloody crackdowns during previous widespread protests in 1988 and 2007. But an increasing police presence have raised fears that could change. State TV says the people refuse to accept lawless wrongdoers who should be prevented or removed. In a statement that came as protests took place nationwide, the message from MRTV first appeared on an on-screen tekaba during regular programming and was not attributed to any organization. It said legal action should be taken against acts that harm the stability of the state, public safety and rule of law. Meanwhile, the military ruler, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, gave a televised address earlier as the protests intensified. The junta leader stressed that the military, also known as the Tatmadaw, exists for the people. The appearance is his first remarks to the nation since he ousted Aung San Suu Kyi's elected government last week.
Rescuers in India's Uttarakhand state are still searching for at least 200 people, said to be missing following a dam disaster over the weekend. A piece of a Himalayan glacier fell into a river and triggered a huge flood, killing 18 people. Most of those missing are believed to be workers from 2 hydropower plants. Also, more than 30 people were trapped inside a tunnel 200 meters long when the torrent of icy water swept down the valley, carrying rocks and earth as it gathered speed. There has been no contact with them since. While hundreds of troops, paramilitaries, and military helicopters have been sent to the region to help with rescue efforts, an investigation is ongoing into what caused the glacial burst. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, floods caused by heavy rainfall triggered evacuations and power outages in some parts of the country's capital, Jakarta, today. Households along the city's Ciliwung River were particularly affected by the floods. Local authorities say some elderly residents and small children were evacuated from flooded neighborhoods. The country frequently suffers floods and landslides, particularly during the rainy season from November to March. Well, let's check in on the coronavirus situation across the globe. Amidst the concern surrounding the efficacy of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine on the South African variant of the coronavirus, some scientists in Britain think all hope is not lost yet. Dr. Mike Tilsdale, an infectious disease expert at the University of Warwick, who advises the government, is one of them. Here's more in our global update.
Dr. Mike Tilsdale says while it does not appear that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has any less effect at preventing severe disease, the case is not the same with mild cases.
What we're less sure about is how effective it is against mild and moderate disease. And that means that people who have the vaccine could potentially still be infected and still pass the virus on if they get infected with this South African variant. So It is a concern, but we do need to get a little bit more data before we know what the real risks are in terms of the South African variant and protection from the variant with this vaccine.
Britain has urged calm, citing evidence that the vaccines prevent grave illness and death, while AstraZeneca says it believes its vaccine could protect against severe disease. Health workers in Spain are buckling under the emotional toll of treating COVID-19 patients. The country has been among the worst hit countries, with around 3 million cases and more than 61,000 deaths. About 45% of healthcare staff in the country were at high risk of some type of mental disorder after the coronavirus first wave, according to a recent survey of 9,000 professionals in 18 hospitals. It also showed 3.5% of them had suicidal thoughts. France's Health Minister, Olivier Véran, was vaccinated earlier today at a vaccination center in the city of Melun, in the Paris region. Véran, who was visiting the center, was asked to his surprise whether he wanted to get the AstraZeneca jab, after asking whether he wouldn't deprive anyone of the shot. He agreed. Finally, Australia is reassuring citizens over the efficacy of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine after South Africa suspended its use because data showed it offered limited protection against a new strain of the virus. Australia's Minister of Health, Greg Hunt, said the vaccine is effective in its primary objective. The country has ordered 53 million doses of the vaccine, the vast majority of which will be manufactured locally by CSL Limited.
And from South Africa, we are learning authorities have suspended the rollout of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, which arrived in the country just last Monday. Early scientific data released on Sunday by the health minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, revealed that the vaccine offered just 22% efficacy against the second variant of the coronavirus, also known as 501Y.V2, discovered in the country in October last year. Dr. Mkhize has announced that a team of experts would give guidance on the way forward with this vaccine.
South Africa mutated to develop a variant which alters the spike protein of the virus. The virus has also been assessed against, the vaccine rather, has been assessed against this variant for effectiveness. The results suggest that the variant has significantly reduced the effectiveness of the virus on mild or moderate infection, and we are uncertain about the impact of the vaccine that it will have on hospitalization, severe diseases, and death. Excuse me. This means that what we will take from Professor Shabir Madhi is that some more work needs to be done on this issue, because the results from other countries have been quite satisfactory, but there are issues in South Africa that we need to study a bit more.
So I think there are two issues that I would like to pick up on. The first issue relates to interchangeability of vaccines. And those sort of studies are already underway in the United Kingdom, where some individuals that received the AstraZeneca vaccine will probably be receiving the Pfizer vaccine as a second dose. And probably within the space of the next 6 weeks or so, we should get some data with regard to the interchangeability of vaccines. And it might well be that in South Africa, that we also explore the interchangeability of vaccines, including possibly the J&J and AstraZeneca vaccine. The other important issue, which I think I would like to bring to the fore, is that it's very likely South Africa, unfortunately, will experience another resurgence in next, probably in 3-4 months, when we head into the winter period. And the question that we need to ask ourselves, in the context of knowing that the COVID-19 vaccines, in both AstraZeneca as well as the J&J vaccine, are safe, foremost that they are safe. And even though there are question marks in terms of the effectiveness of the AstraZeneca vaccine against severe disease, do we want to take the risk of not vaccinating high-risk groups now, knowing that we're not going to cause harm, but that they might be protected against severe disease? So I think it's an important question that we need to address. And I think it somewhat would be reckless for us to decide just to discard of the 1 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine that is available with a biological probability that those vaccines might still be useful in terms of protecting against severe disease. So we might want to reframe our target group for vaccination in the next few weeks, few months, but it really needs to be centered around the prevention of severe disease and death from what will likely be a resurgence sometime soon.
Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, joins us now. Betty, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So South Africa is putting a pause on the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine following reports that it is quite ineffective against the COVID variant found in the country. So what happens to all of those 1 million doses already in the country, knowing these vaccines do have a shelf life?
Well, as per shelf life, we understand from the ministry that the expiry date for this batch that has come in from the 1st of February will end in April. So, as you heard Professor Shabir Mahdi there, who is a vaccinologist, he's saying that it will be reckless to throw it all away. Fine, we're pausing to reassess, and as the minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, has said, they will be waiting for the scientists to advise them on what next to do with what has already been bought. But you heard Professor Mahdi also talking about interchangeability of the vaccines. Probably you start off with the batch you already have, that's the AstraZeneca, then switch to the Johnson & Johnson bit, which has been found to be 85% effective in treating, that's in the trials. We don't know if another variant will come out and things will change, because this thing is moving on a daily basis. So we're waiting to see what the scientists will tell the government to do with what has already been bought. But if I'll repeat what he says there's a biological probability that the vaccine may still be useful in preventing severe disease. So probably mild cases could still be treated. But what we have here is 22% efficacy against the 501Y.V2.
Well, the country has recorded almost 1.5 million COVID-19 cases, which is one of the highest vaccines in the continent. So it is important to get these vaccines out. So what alternatives is the country considering at this time?
At this time, the issue of interchangeability, first dose AstraZeneca, which is already on ground, next dose probably Pfizer or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And they're considering Johnson & Johnson. We recall that the minister had said last week that they will be producing it locally. A local company called Aspen already has emergency use authorization to produce it locally. So that may be a little cost effective for them, but it will still cost the country. So they're looking at that. And the minister also said that there are talks going on with Pfizer, with Russia, the Sputnik vaccine, Moderna, Novavax. So they're not stopping. Whatever is going to work for the country, they will keep the conversations going in order to be able to get the rollout to happen, to achieve what they call the herd immunity, which will give a bit of safety, regarding people being safe and then inoculating people in the country.
Well, what is the general reception to the news, first about people receiving the vaccine and knowing now that the variant in the country is very different from everything else that's out there?
People are shocked and worried. People are calling for the head of a government, but the government is under pressure as well. There are those who understand that no one alive now has dealt with something like this before. So they're still looking to government to see, they just want the government to be transparent about whatever is changing and whatever is going on. We heard from the health association, the Health Workers Association, they commended government for being transparent about things that have changed, and they expect that transparency to continue. So people wouldn't have false hope or false sense of security, just to know what's going on, and then they'll know how to deal with it.
All right, well, thanks again so much, Betty, for joining us and giving us further clarity on the situation there.
Thank you very much.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has pleaded not guilty to corruption charges at the resumption of his trial some 6 weeks before Israeli voters again passed judgment on his leadership. Netanyahu was indicted in 2019 in a long-running cases involving gifts from millionaire friends and for allegedly seeking regulatory favors for media tycoons in return for favorable coverage. He last came to court in May at the start of a trial subsequently delayed by coronavirus lockdowns. Despite tight security outside the courthouse today, protesters came from different parts of the country to protest against him. His trial comes 6 weeks before voters again head to the polls to pass judgment on his leadership. Iran is running 2 surveillance operations in cyberspace, targeting more than 1,000 dissidents, according to a leading cybersecurity company, Check Point. Check Point says the efforts were directed against individuals in Iran and 12 other countries, including the UK and US. It said 2 groups involved were using new techniques to install spyware on targets' PCs and mobile devices. And this was then being used to steal call recordings and media files. The American-Israeli company's researchers documented 1,200 victims being targeted by the campaign, living in 7 countries. Australia's Foreign Minister Marise Payne says journalist Cheng Lei has been formally arrested in China after 6 months of detention on suspicion of illegally supplying state secrets overseas. Cheng, who hosted a business show on the English channel of China's largest state media broadcaster, CCTV, and who was a high-profile anchor on its English-language channel, CGTN, was arrested on February 5th. She was initially detained in August last year. Payne said the Australian government has raised strong concerns about her detention at senior levels. Tensions between Australia and China have been high for the past year, after Canberra called for an international investigation into the source of the coronavirus pandemic, and Beijing responded with trade reprisals.
我们希望澳大利亚方面切实尊重中国的司法主权，停止以任何方式干预中方依法办案。
I also advise that on Friday evening, the Australian government was informed by Chinese authorities through our embassy in Beijing that Australian citizen Cheng Lei has now been formally arrested on suspicion of illegally supplying state secrets overseas. Ms. Cheng has been detained in China since August of 2020. We have consistently raised our strong concerns about her detention regularly at the most senior levels. We have made a number of consular visits to her as part of our bilateral consular agreement. The most recent of those was on the 27th of January, and we continue to seek assurances of her being treated appropriately, humanely, in accordance with international standards, and that will continue to be the case. Within the Chinese legal system, the period after formal arrest can take up to 7 months, is our understanding. We will stay in close touch with the Chinese authorities as that progresses, and as I said, provide all possible support.
Haitian authorities have arrested nearly 24 people, including a Supreme Court judge, for their alleged role in a plot to oust President Jovenel Moïse that has exacerbated political tensions in the troubled Caribbean country. Prime Minister Joseph Jout told a news conference at his private residence that a senior police official was also among the 23 people detained with money, guns, and ammunition. President Moïse, speaking later at a Port-au-Prince airport on his way to launch the annual Carnival in the coastal town of Jacmel, said the plotters' aim was to make an attempt on my life. The arrests come after leading opposition figures this week announced a plan to replace Moïse with a new head of state, accusing the president of being authoritarian and presiding over economic chaos in the Western Hemisphere's poorest country. Earlier on Sunday, anti-government demonstrators in Port-au-Prince clashed with police who responded with tear gas. There were also street protests against Moïse in some other towns. The opposition plan called for members of civil society and opposition leaders to pick a new president from one of the sitting Supreme Court judges, instead of waiting for general elections scheduled for September. Indonesian single mother Pirianti bows stiffly like a robot as she and her 5-year-old son, their bodies gleaming in silver paint, appeal to passerbys for an occasional coin at a busy intersection outside the capital, Jakarta. They are among a group of people dubbed Manusia Silver, or Silver People, who use the strategy to draw attention while struggling to make ends meet after the coronavirus pushed Southeast Asia's largest economy into recession last year. She has been doing such daily performances for 3 months, accompanied by her 15-year-old nephew, Rafi, and 5-year-old son, Faldo. On good days, the housewife, who had only an elementary school education before her divorce, can earn about 70,000 rupiah, or $5, enough to just scrape by and pay the rent. Pirianti uses a homemade paint mixture of screen printing powder and cooking oil to coat their bodies and add dramatic effect to the robot act. She says the silver paint causes no ill effects. The pandemic, which brought Indonesia's first recession in more than 2 decades, with the economy shrinking almost 2.2% in the fourth quarter, has been tough for millions in the informal sector who need to leave their homes to make a living. Meanwhile, for florists across America, February this year is unlike no other. 56-year-old Mark Chatoff, the CEO of the California Flower Mall, one of the country's largest markets in downtown Los Angeles, says that when California imposed its first lockdown in March, some florists closed down because weddings, graduations, conventions, and other big events ended almost overnight. Then came pandemic funerals.
Yes, we lost the weddings, we lost the graduations for 2020 and third and fourth quarter. And now we're looking at, there is still demand for floral products, but this looks a little bit differently. It might be, sadly, a funeral, also to brighten someone's home because you're under, your stay-at-home order, and so there's a lot of that too. It's a mixed happiness. They're happy to be back at work, they're happy to have business and be operational. But there's also a lot of stress and emotional stress because we're dealing with pandemic. There's a concern about getting sick. There are family members that have been impacted. There are family members and people that are no longer with us anymore.
Well, as we do celebrate the season of love, it would be nice to look out for those who never expected that they might be losing someone around this time. That's all for the program. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening. Stay safe.